emulators were used in the production of this podcast.
Where did you learn to podcast? That good?
That's awesome, sweetie. Thank you. This is the Atari Jaguar Game by Game podcast, where we dig deep into Atari's last home video game console and its library, one game at a time. Love it, hate it, never played it, it doesn't matter, I'm glad you're here. Welcome. I am Shinto, your partially texture-mapped host, and in this episode we develop a knack for knack-knacks in part number J9044, Supercross 3D. Supercross 3D is a 2MB cartridge, a motocross racing game for one player, developed by Tiertex Limited and published by Atari in December of 1995. It carries an ESRB rating of K to A, kids to adults. I discussed Tiertex in the last episode, Flashback the Quest for Identity, so as laziness dictates, I'm going to point you there for the company history rather than cover it here again in this episode. One full year before release, Atari Sports producer Tom Gillen mentioned Supercross 3D at the Atari Holiday Roundtable conference on the Genie Online Network. Mr. Gillen referenced it alongside Hardball 3 as the two games he was working on as part of his new producer role. He started working at Atari during the Warner days, before the Tramiel takeover, actually, and was previously working as the lead of the software test group. He tested Atari games from the 2600 on through the Jaguar, but would not end up as the credited producer for Supercross 3D. And of course, Hardball 3 never came to fruition on the Jaguar. I'm pretty sure Mr. Gillen moved over to Sony, though I don't have a time frame. Anyway, in this roundtable discussion, Tom Gillen said that Supercross 3D would be available on a cartridge, though he held out the possibility that future versions of the game, sequels I suppose, might be on CD. He also said that the game should be able to be networked, perhaps over the JagLink or voice modem. The initial release date was targeted for June of 1995, but this slipped to September, then October, then November, before sticking to the December release date. June 20th, 1995, an early version of Supercross 3D was shown off at the Atari Fun & Games press event at their headquarters in Sunnyvale, California. GamePro magazine reported it under the name Super Motocross, and whatever it's called at the time, the game also made a hasty appearance at the European Computer Trade Show in London, held the second weekend of September 1995. Ian Lasky was working the Atari booth at the ECTS. He was responsible for showing off Attack of the Mutant Penguins, and he had some choice words about Supercross 3D, calling it, quote, absolute and utter trash. Mr. Lasky went on to say that it was very jerky and difficult to control, and Atari didn't do themselves any favors by showing off this title. The thing is, Supercross 3D wasn't originally intended to be shown at this event. It took the place of another title that was even less ready to be displayed, so Supercross was kind of a last-minute substitution. Atari later said that the final game would have at least twice the frame rate shown at ECTS, and that the controls were getting some serious attention. If all this is true, Mr. Lasky said, then Supercross 3D, quote, could well end up as a promising title. Supercross 3D was programmed by Tiertex developer Chris Brunning. Some of Mr. Brunning's other credits include Madden 97, FIFA 97, 98, and 2000, World Cup 98, and other racing games like Freestyle Metal X, Motocross Mania 3, and 3 of the Dirt series of games. This is just the sampling. Mr. Brunning has dozens of games under his belt, most of them programming credits. Supercross 3D was mentioned in an Atari press release December 15th, 1995, announcing its availability along with iWar, Atari Karts, Fever Pitch Soccer, and the Jaguar's new $99 price tag. Good luck finding a Jaguar today that cheap. The Supercross tournament circuit is spread across 14 cities in the contiguous United States, taking you to the states of California, Texas, Florida, Georgia, North Carolina, Indiana, Michigan, Minnesota, and Washington State. So pretty much a loop, but without all the back and forth that gave you jet lag in Power Drive Rally. But whereas Power Drive Rally lets you drive around in cars, in Supercross 3D you ride motorcycles, dirt bikes, around a dirt track with jumps and turns and probably a bunch of other guys on dirt bikes. You can practice any track, you can enter a one-off race, or you can enter the full tournament and tour the American periphery. Competitors arrive from all over the world to enter the Supercross tournament, so as a participant you can choose your country, join a team, choose your rider's appearance, and enter your name. Or somebody's name, I guess it doesn't have to be yours, as long as you can fit it in 9 characters. The team names are Atari, Jaguar, Tiertex, and Privateer. And you can choose any country you like as long as it's either the United States, Japan, England, France, Netherlands, Belgium, Australia, or Italy. You can also choose between one of 5 different color schemes for your rider. Green suit with a yellow bike, black suit with a green bike, red suit with a black bike, blue suit with a red bike, and purple suit with a red bike. You can customize your rider before each practice run, each race, or when entering the tournament. Whichever game mode you choose, you can also customize your motorcycle before each race. You have the ability to tweak the front tire, back tire, front shocks, rear shocks, and gearing, each of these having 3 levels, soft, medium, or hard, except for gearing, which can be low, intermediate, or high. Same basic concept, different words. The tracks come in 3 different surface flavors, soft, medium, and hard. They all taste the same, but the different surfaces affect your handling. You may want softer tires and shocks on a soft surface, and harder tires and shocks on a hard surface. The lower your gearing, the higher your top speed, but at the expense of acceleration. So a low gear is good for tracks with long straightaways, and, well, I guess a competent driver is helpful too. The surface types are fairly evenly distributed across the different tracks, with 5 tracks each being either soft or medium, and 4 tracks having the hard surface. The track itself usually features a large number of 90-degree and hairpin turns, several tall hills, and usually a strip of shallow bumps. These steep hills will more often than not take you airborne, and there are 3 things you can do in midair. You can panic, you can plan your safe landing, or you can show off. The back of the box mentions knack-knacks and one-handers, and I had to look up what those are. Well, the first one. A knack-knack involves a dismount, kicking one leg back and then getting back on the bike before you land. It was popularized by Jeremy McGrath in late 1993, though the move had origins in BMX about 6 years earlier. I've got a link in the show notes for the history of the knack-knack move. It's apparently pretty popular now, though I'm not sure if Supercross 3D gives you a full knack-knack or just something close. The other trick in the game, the one-hander, it mostly looks like you raise one fist in the air, maybe stand up a little bit. These fancy moves don't really do anything for you in the game. There are no bonus points or power-ups or sponsorship contracts involved. It's just a way to express your own callous recklessness, and probably crash if you do it wrong. In most game modes, you share the track with other riders, but you don't really crash into them. You don't collide. It might alter your trajectory somewhat, but it won't, knock you over or anything. No, that happens when you run into a downed bike. I see that sometimes at the bottom of a hill, 1 or 2 bikes on the ground. So perhaps someone else was expressing their callous recklessness, and you need to avoid them. They're a bad influence. There are 5 difficulty levels in the game which affect the skill of your competitors. From easiest to hardest, these skill levels are called Rookie, Rad, Pro, Tough, spelled T-U-F-F, and Ace. Pro is the default. The game features instant replays of your crashes, but if you find that sort of thing a little too masochistic, you can turn that off. You can also choose to play with or without in-game music, and you can adjust your controls. More on that later. Aside from practice mode, here's how races work in Supercross 3D. It's not documented in the manual. Well, it's kind of documented in the manual, but what the manual says is wrong. So here's what I was able to figure out through my own testing. The first round is broken out into 4 heats, labeled A through D, and there are 7 riders per heat. Given that there are 28 total riders in the competition, the math checks out. The top 3 riders from each heat automatically proceed to the semifinals, so that's 12 in total. But to fill out the field of 16 semifinalists, there are 2 other races, last chance races, they're called, with the top 2 racers from each one of those proceeding to the semis. Each round involves 3 full laps around the track, and it might feel like more because there's this little bit extra between the starting gate and the point that serves as the lap boundary or finish line. So 2 semifinal rounds with 8 riders per round, and the top 3 from each semifinal race automatically move on to the finals. However, there's another last chance opportunity here for the remaining riders, the remaining 8, with the top 2 in that race barely squeaking into the final round. So when you add it all up, you can compete in between 3 and 5 rounds per race, depending on how many of those last chance opportunities you need. In tournament mode, after the final round, points are awarded to the entire field of 28 competitors. You then move on to the next race, basically starting the elimination process over again with a new track. Here's how those points are assigned. First place gets 20 points, second place earns 17 points, third place gets 15, fourth gets 13, fifth place is 11, sixth is 10, seventh is 9, and eighth place gets 8 points. Everyone else, big goose egg. You have the option to save the game prior to each race, and doing so will write your name, the team name, nationality, and tournament placing to the cartridge. There's only 1 slot available on the cartridge though, so you can't have multiple tournaments going at once or multiple people each with their own tournament. It's a solitary endeavor. You race, as I said, against 27 competitors, and each one of those guys also has a name. There are 60 total rider names available in the cartridge, and 27 of these names are chosen at random for each tournament. I can't account for all of them, but some of these names are definitely real people, and here are the ones that I could identify. J. Prince is John Prince, TierTech's co-founder and credited for technical design in the game. D. Campbell is Donald Campbell, the other TierTech's co-founder, and listed under special thanks in the credits. F. Thomason is Ferran Thomason, Atari producer. D. Still is Daryl Still, the Atari UK marketing manager. A. Bowden is Alistair Bowden, who also worked for Atari UK. C. Brunning is Chris Brunning, TierTech's developer and sole programmer credited in Supercross 3D. D. Stead is Dave Stead. G. Marshall is Gary Marshall. And D. Anderson is Doug Anderson. These last 3 are also listed under special thanks in the credits. And finally, B. Armstrong is Barry Armstrong, graphics design and animation on Supercross 3D. The other 70 names available in the game, I couldn't really match those up with real-life humans. This kind of reminds me of cannon fodder, though, having a bunch of names out there that can be pulled out at random. It's kind of neat. You can lose a race or 2 races or all the races and still be in the tournament. They won't kick you out for sucking. You just don't get any points, and you don't get any special ending at the end. After the tournament is over, and if you do not finish first, then it's right back to the main menu. However, if you do finish first in the tournament, there is a special ending. How special is it? I don't want to tell you if you don't want to know, so here's where I say Bishop. Spoiler alert.
Spoiler alert. Spoiler alert. If you wish to avoid spoilers, skip ahead 48 seconds on my mark. 3, 2, 1, mark.
You've made it through the entire tournament and ended up with the most points of all 28 competitors. Before the final scores are displayed, you get a picture of a guy standing before a mostly clear blue sky, racing goggles around his neck. In his left hand, he's holding a bottle of champagne, and in his right, up in the air, is a shiny trophy.
That's it?
Yeah, after about 4 or 5 seconds, that screen goes away. You see the overall standings with the final points, and then it's back to the main menu.
That sounds pretty lame.
It does indeed. No special music, no animation, just that one picture on the left side of the screen. I think what I'll do is include this picture in the show notes. I think there's a way to hide it unless you click on a button, so I'll do that. You can close out the spoiler section now, Bishop.
End of spoilers. The remainder of this episode is also a letdown.
Hey. You control Supercross 3D with an Atari Jaguar gamepad. It's well suited to the 3-button layout, but pretty much ignores the keypad completely. By default, the B button is the throttle, A is brake, and C is the trick button. You can change these up in the options menu. Well, in either options menu. There are 2. More on that in a bit. The trick button has to be used pretty much at just the right time in your jump. Use it too late and you'll crash. Also, it's important to tap the trick button once. Holding it down, it'll try to perform multiple consecutive tricks, like a auto-fire fully automatic weapon, but the only possible casualty from this weapon is you. The directional pad will steer left or right, but only when you're moving. You can actually lean a bit forward or backward by pushing up or down on the D-pad, respectively. I can't tell if there's any visual indication of the lean, but it is noticeable on a jump. If you hit a big ramp holding down on the D-pad, you'll get more air, like a 1990s Mountain Dew commercial. One source I found says that holding down on the D-pad will let you pop a wheelie, lifting the front tire off the ground. I'm pretty sure this happens, but it can be hard to tell at times. The manual doesn't mention up or down on the D-pad doing anything at all. The pause button will pause the game, pretty much anywhere, even the main menu, character select, tune-up screens. The title screen and map preview, whenever you see the spinning track below, you can't pause there. Pause will instead function like any other face button. In the places where you can pause, though, you'll see the word pause in a colorful splotch in the middle of the screen. If you hold down the A button while paused, you can adjust the music volume. Hold A and press left or right on the D-pad to move the volume gauge, which is like a yellow squiggle that oscillates more wildly at the loud end, like a waveform. Holding B will likewise let you adjust the sound effects. Neither of these, however, will give you a preview sound. In many other Jaguar games, you'll hear the music or some sound effect as a preview while adjusting these volumes. Doesn't do that here. Pushing 1 and 3 simultaneously on the keypad will hide the paused graphic for screenshots and so forth. If you pause a race in progress, or a race about to be in progress, like at the starting line, you can push the option button to bring up a separate menu of game options. Here you can set replays and in-game music on or off, you can change up the controls, and you can quit. But selecting quit doesn't quit out of the menu. Well, it doesn't only quit out of the menu, but it's basically like a DNF, did not finish. It forces you to finish last in the race. This may not be what you want. In fact, it's probably not what you want. So rather than selecting quit to exit the menu, push option again. That'll take you back to the pause screen, and from there you can unpause and continue the game. A confirmation prompt before quitting the race might have been nice. Holding down star and hash on the keypad will reset the game, and you can reset cartridge memory to defaults by holding star, option, and hash from the title screen. You can also toggle the music that plays between races by pushing the 0 button. If you do this, and then push pause, and hold down the A button to change the music volume, instead of a volume gauge, it'll say muted, which I thought was a nice detail. Booting up the game, you get a small rectangular graphic reading licensed by Atari. It's the same image you see on other Jaguar games, but I don't think I've covered any of those yet. I know Primal Rage has it, probably others. I'll find out when I cover them. The image has a beveled brown marble look with gold lettering, using a serif font for the words licensed by, and then the Atari logo and typeface below that. You see this for about 4 or 5 seconds, you can't skip it, and then you get the title screen with accompanying music. The logo dominates the center of the screen. There's a giant colorful X made up of multiple layers of rough slashes and colored dots with the word Supercross across the center in a chrome-looking font. And the capital letter S looks like, I don't know, like a muffler with 2 tailpipes. The logo for tier text is up toward the top of the logo, and all the letters are blue except for the red R and X. The 1995 copyright text can be found at the bottom of the screen. In the background, behind the logo, we're looking down into one of the stadiums from above, and the whole thing is rotating. Well, maybe we're the ones rotating. I guess that would make more sense. I mean, why would you build a giant rotating stadium? What use is that? So yeah, we're focused on the stadium spinning around, kind of choppily. If we sit and wait for something to happen, something's going to happen. After about 22 seconds or 3 full rotations, we get some gameplay footage, a single rider on the track for about 20 seconds. The screen fades out again, and now we're above a different track, rotating again, but this time as we rotate, we zoom in on the center and then back off, repeatedly. After about 22 seconds, we're back to the original spinning view, different track, and then a new gameplay sequence, spin and zoom on another track, and then we continue looping like this. These 3 screens, and I think 2 different gameplay sequences. Push a button, and we get the main menu. There's a background that looks like motorcycle tread tracks through dirt or mud. The Supercross logo appears at the top. It's kind of interesting that you don't see the full title Supercross 3D anywhere in the actual game, but the main menu does contain the items Practice, Race, Tournament, Load Game, and Options. Starting from the bottom, your options menu looks a lot like the in-game options. You can toggle replays and in-game music and change up the controls. But here you can also change the skill level from the 5 available. Up and down on the D-pad to choose the option, left or right to change it. At the bottom is Exit, which takes you back to the main menu. Note that this says Exit here rather than Quit like we see in the in-game options menu. The words are sometimes used synonymously, but here in Supercross 3D, they definitely do different things. If you choose, anything else from the main menu, you're taken to a screen where you can customize your rider, which will be preloaded with the one from the saved game. On the left is a rotating driver on a bike. It's a smooth rotation most of the time, but there are a couple abrupt changes during its 360-degree spin, I'm not sure why. Select Rider is highlighted at the bottom of the screen. You can push a button there and continue on with that rider, or you can move the D-pad around the screen to change it up. Oh, that reminds me, the game uses jagged yellow squiggles to indicate when something is selected. The squiggles either surround the object or appear behind it. So, like the options menu, use the D-pad up and down to select what you want to change here, if anything, and left or right to change it. Just a reminder, you can customize the rider name, nationality, team name, and appearance, color scheme. The most complicated of these is the rider name. It'll automatically show, as I said, the name that had been saved to cartridge. But if no such game has been saved, maybe you just opened up your new in-box copy of the game, or you just reset the cartridge memory to default, if that's the case, then the name you'll see is D.Forkin, which refers to Tiertex producer Dibna Forkin. In the likely event this is not your name as well, you might want to change it. To do this, highlight it with the D-pad and push a button. This puts you in edit mode. Left or right on the D-pad will move between the 9 spaces available. It's blue when highlighted and white otherwise. You push up or down on the D-pad to cycle through the alphabet. You've got upper and lowercase letters to choose from, and also a space and a dot. You need to push the A button to use the name as entered. Pushing B functions like a backspace. It sets that character to blank and moves the selection 1 spot to the left. and pushing the C button will erase the entire thing. It's a little confusing, and the manual doesn't help. Once your rider is selected, you go to the map screen. This shows the continental United States on a field of blue. Looks like a giant blue paint splotch. This paint splotch thing, it's used throughout the game, a common background style or boundary style. Here it's behind the United States, but in front of the tire tread mud background. You see the lines separating the states. They're colored in a rainbow gradient, and, well, the map has kind of a cartoony look to it, and the lines aren't 100% accurate. If you were thinking about using this map to plan a cross-country road trip, I think you should reconsider. Maybe a road atlas by Rand McNally. This podcast is not sponsored by Rand McNally. You'll see red dots roughly positioned where each city is located. The selected city is shown in white, and the state containing the selected city raises up to distinguish itself from the surrounding, apparently lesser states. If you're in tournament mode, you'll start in San Jose, California. There's no other choice. In practice mode, you can move left or right on the D-pad to cycle between the different cities. If you've loaded up a saved game, the selected city will be whichever one was up next when you saved. You only see about half the country at one time, well, maybe about 2/3, so it'll pan left or right as you change cities. At the bottom of the screen are 3 options: exit, save, and go. In practice and race modes, it's just exit to take you back to the main menu. In practice and race modes, push a button when the city is highlighted and you'll either practice or race in that one city. In tournament mode, select go to start the race in whichever city is highlighted. But before you do that, before you can actually get in there, you have the race preview. You see a full screen rotating view of the track, and this is overlaid with text showing the city name, surface type, which is either hard surface, medium surface, or soft surface. At the bottom of the screen, you have the track lap record with the number of seconds using a resolution of hundredths of a second. You also see the record holder. If it's a default record, every track has a default record time to beat. It'll show one of the names included in the cart, first initial dot last name. If that record time has been broken by a human, you'll see not that human's name, but the team name. I think the reason they did it this way, using the team name rather than the full name of the rider, is that you don't need to use nearly as much storage space in the EEPROM. Instead of 9 bytes per track for the full name, you can do it in only 2 bits to represent the numbers 0 through 3, with each bit assigned to a different team name. You only need 2 bits for that. I'm not saying that's how they did it, but they might have. This EEPROM, you have to remember, only stores 128 bytes, so you've got to be pretty fastidious about how you use it. Anyway, ostensibly, this screen is designed to help you decide how to configure your bike, and if you hit a button, you're taken to the tune-up screen. This has the same tire tread, dirt background that you see in the rest of the interface, but has a large photograph of a motorcycle with a paint splotch-shaped border separating the picture from the rest of the background. You use the D-pad to move between the different components that you can customize, left or right to cycle between them, and up or down to change it. You'll see both some yellow squiggles over the component, like the front tire, front shocks, back tire, back shocks, and gears, and you also see a picture of that component in the upper right corner of the screen, again with a paint splotch-shaped border. You see the name of the component above the picture and the option below, and as you move the D-pad up or down, the top right picture changes to reflect the different option. An exception here is the gearing. The picture doesn't change, and the different options, which are high, intermediate, and low, are shown just below the name. At the bottom of the screen, you have 3 options: practice, race, or map. If you're just in practice mode, I guess you won't see the race option. The map option will go back to the map screen. Practice will let you do a single uncontested lap, and race will put you in the 3-round competition to find the winner for that track. Before each race, you'll see the lineup screen, which shows everybody who's participating in that particular race. You have their number, their name, and a flag representing their nationality. The screen only shows 5 names at a time, so after a brief moment it'll scroll up to reveal the rest of the names. You can push down on the D-pad to speed up the process, but you can't push up on the D-pad to reverse it. Dirt bikes don't have reverse. I think, I'm not really sure. At the top of the screen, you have the text lineup and then the name of the city, followed by a description of the race. This will say Heat A for the first round, semifinal, or final. If you fail to finish in the top 3 for either the first heat or the semi, you'll get a last chance race, and it'll say last chance at the top. Your rider always has a number of 1, and your first race is always called Heat A. Heats B, C, and D happen behind the scenes. You don't see the heats themselves or the results of them. An interesting thing is that the game actually contains the text Heat B, Heat C, and Heat D, even though you never actually see that text displayed on the screen. At the bottom of the screen it says Race, presented like a menu option, but no squiggly yellow line behind it. But that's okay, it's the only thing you can do here, so just push a button. The next screen you'll see is a view behind your rider. It's the in-game screen. And to start out, it shows the city name in the top left corner and the race name in the top right. Heat A, semifinal, or final. At the bottom of the screen, you'll have your racer's name, nationality, and flag displayed. A countdown timer appears in the center of the screen. It's white text on a multicolored paint splotch. I did say they use that paint splotch design everywhere. And it counts down from 5. Instead of 0, we see the word go. There's a gate in front of each racer's starting position, and at go time, the gate lowers. If you try to accelerate before the timer reaches go, you get locked in that gate for about a second, letting everyone else go in front of you first. That's what you get for trying to jump the gate. You see a flag man off to the side waving a green flag, and all the on-screen text disappears at the same time the timer reaches go. You don't need that stuff anymore. As you drive around the track, your position in the race is shown in the bottom left corner, the ordinal number 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and so on. A colorful paint splotch serves as the background. You may notice one tall, flat-topped hill along the track with a gray side and some guy standing on top. This is what separates the laps and serves as the finish line. You might think, man, that guy sure has guts standing up there with motorcycles flying by, but I don't think he actually has guts. I think he's quite two-dimensional, in fact, a flat sprite like the guy who waves the starting flag. Once you complete a lap, you'll see the bar at the bottom of the screen again with your name, nationality, and now instead of a flag, you'll have the place you are in the race, 1 through 7 or 8, depending on the race. In the top right corner, as a lap completes, you see your lap time, how quickly you completed that lap, shown as white numbers on a colorful splotch. If this happens to beat the track record, you'll see the text New Lap Record in white at the top of the screen. After a couple seconds, the lap time changes to which lap you're on, either lap 2 or last lap. It's blank initially on the first lap, but does eventually show lap 1. As you're about to begin the final lap, the guy on the pedestal will wave a white flag, and he'll be waving a black and white checkered flag when his position is serving as the finish line. As you pass him waving the checkered flag, the race ends, and your rider will come to a stop. If you finish in first place, you get a special first place screen, dirty tire print background with a paint splotch bordered photo of a mid-air motorcyclist right arm raised in the air. His hand is actually somewhat outside the paint splotch border, which looks pretty nice. The screen reads first place, has your name, and the type of race, be it Heat A, semifinal, or final, and the name of the city. After a few seconds, or when you push the button, you see the results. This is a screen showing the list of competitors who get to advance to the next round, so first, second, and third place for the heats and semis, and just first and second places for the last chance rounds. After pushing a button, you see the positions of everyone else who was in the race, 4th through 7th or 8th, scrolling if necessary. If you're not done with that track yet, you go back to the tune-up screen and then on to the next race. Once you've finished that race, it's back to the map screen to either select a city if you're in practice or race modes, or to be shown the next city if you're in tournament mode. You can save your place in tournament mode by selecting the save option at the bottom of the screen. You'll be asked to confirm, it's a yes or no question, and assuming you choose yes, you'll see the white text game saved on a large, colorful, paint splotch looking thing in the center of the screen. game is presented with 2D sprites on a 3D background. The sprites, the motorcycles with their riders, these were rendered on Silicon Graphics hardware, so they look pretty good. There's a surprising amount of animation in these racers if you look closely enough. Things like sticking out a foot on a tight turn, or treads on the tires as they spin, stuff like that. It must have taken some work. Racers will have different colored uniforms, white vest but different colored jumpsuit, either blue, red, black, purple, green, yellow, or gray. The bikes come in different colors too. The rear fender is especially visible: yellow, white, green, red, or blue. You also have a stripe across the back of your helmet which seems to match your motorcycle color. I guess that's so that you can remember which bike is yours out of the pile up at the bottom of the hill. The track itself features texture-mapped streaks of mud, which contrasts with the flat shaded brown around it. That makes it easier to tell where you should be driving, but the boundary is abrupt, both visually and in gameplay. You tend to crash if you go off the textured track, and it's not terribly forgiving. Sometimes it'll bounce you back, maybe send you off in the wrong direction, but oftentimes even cutting the corner a bit too sharply, even at low speed, you'll crash. If you're playing with instant replays turned on, any type of crash will trigger that instant replay. You'll get a slightly different viewpoint and a big letter R in the top right corner over the top of a colorful paint splotch. Pushing a button will end the instant replay and put you back in the race. To help delineate the track boundaries, there are occasional red and white barriers, not very tall and paper thin. They are drawn with polygons though, and you'll also have arrows, black and white, that are about as unambiguous as you can get. These aren't simply flat rectangles like the red and white track boundaries, but look more like trapezoidal boxes with purple ends. The starting line is off the looping track. This I didn't expect. You'll start on a little stretch of textured dirt, enter the loop, and then never go back onto that stretch unless you've done something horribly, horribly wrong. You compete in stadiums with the grandstands full of people, a sellout crowd each time. It looks like a texture, a low-resolution photograph of people, which is reasonably convincing at a distance, I'd say, but the effect falls apart if you look closely, so don't look closely. Two ends of the arena have a gray polygonal shade over the top, and here's the neat part: there's a jumbotron, or similar giant screen, at each end of the stadium. This will show your viewpoint in real time as you move around, so in general it makes the arena feel more alive. There's room for advertisements and a low white wall that surrounds the arena, though the only ads you'll see are the logos for Tex and Jaguar. The frame rate in the game is low, very low. I'd say it's borderline tolerable if you're the only one on the track or out in front, but with several other riders in your vicinity and the Jumbotron off in the distance, the frame rate drops to single digits, like around 5 or 6 frames per second, but I don't have an exact measurement. Aside from the track layout and sometimes the general color of the dirt, all stadiums look identical and every one has a clear blue sky, even Seattle. Sound effects predictably consist of a few motorcycle noises. There's no crowd sound. There's music that plays during races, 2 different tracks alternating with each race. Plus you've got the title screen music, map screen music, post-race music, and racer configuration music, plus a little ditty that plays at the end of each race, and a little bit that plays before the start of a race. It all sounds a lot like mod music to me, with some of the tracks featuring an intro that's not repeated when the music loops. For cheat codes, Atari Age lists a hidden ability to replay certain crashes. The last 5 crashes, actually. All you need to do is pause the game during a race and push the numbers 1 through 5 on the D-pad. Your first crash is number 1, your second is number 2, and so on up through 5. It may not sound like much, but hey, at least they're making use of the keypad. As for bugs, I noticed several times when coming up into a turn in a crowded field, a lot of racers nearby, I would hold left or right on the D-pad to turn, but my guy would just go straight, which is totally not where I wanted to go. I careened off a jump one time and landed on the side of another hill, clipping in and out of the hillside in the replay. Running into other bikes do seem to have an effect, but it's kind of unpredictable. Once a collision made me stop in mid-air, freeze a moment, and then drop straight down, and I'm pretty sure that's not how physics works. If you drive off the track at the end of a race, since the finish line is at the top of a hill, you can take that at a steep angle and fly off the track. The game will stop as you enter the crashing animation. It's kind of silly looking, and it'll even trigger the instant replay, even though the race is over. And finally, not really a bug, but still kind of funny, when the screen is super crazy choppy single-digit frames per second, and you're still driving, you can see your tire spinning. That animation still works, but it's so disconnected with your lack of on-screen movement that I found it amusing. When you purchased a copy of Supercross 3D from your local Jaguar retailer in the 90s, you also got a box and a manual. Maybe also a survey card with a bunch of little tiny boxes that you fill out to join the Jaguar Game Club, and also an order form for the official Jaguar Gamer's Guide, even though it totally won't help you out with this particular game. Anyway, here's what the box looked like. The artwork is a motion-blurred photograph of a motorcycle kicking up dirt as it turns a corner on a motocross track. The left and bottom edges of the front of the box are black, which is striking when parts of the rider extend past the photograph and onto the black area along the left-hand side. The name of the game is written across the front in a, the font is hard to describe. It's not actually a font if you look closely. Repeated letters differ slightly, so the name of the game must have been designed by hand, and the artist maybe had a bit too much caffeine when he or she sketched it out. It's kind of jerky, hard-edged. I imagine a tight-gripped pen pushing hard into the paper. The red letters spelling out Supercross 3D are backed by rectangles, 3 of them, each with a yellow to green gradient. There's a screenshot in the bottom left corner of the box that shows the rider in second place. He's kind of showing off with a one-hander as he flies through the air following a big jump. You can see that it's the first lap, and the Jumbotron is visible off in the distance. It's a really good screenshot to put up front. They chose well. There are 4 more screenshots on the back of the box. From the top left, in clockwise order, we see a rider correcting his angle to get back on the track, 3 other racers around him. Next is a tune-up screen focusing on the front tire. The third screenshot shows the rider in the outside corner of a sharp turn on the last lap. Not sure if it's going to end up well for that guy. And the last screenshot is the beginning of a race. You see the green flag in a crowded field with the American driver named Atari in all caps. The text on the back carries the headline, "Smell the Dirt." Not the most captivating headline, to be sure, but just to make sure that this isn't a game about gardening, here's what the text reads below that. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go for it. Jump off the start and go freight training into the first corner with 7 other riders. Try to do knack-knacks and one-handers off the jumps to grab the crowd's attention. If you're up for shooting the curves and hitting the whoops full speed ahead, you could be championship material. Practice hard enough and you could find yourself leading the pack of the Supercross tournament circuit. This text is also repeated more or less in French and German. The cartridge design is a lot like the front of the box, motion blur photo on the right and all black on the left with a over-caffeinated text and big block of copyright fine print below that. Since the game was published by Atari, you'll find the Atari name and logo embossed on the back. The manual is a stapled monochrome booklet, 3 languages like the back of the box, and each language gives you around 14 pages. The first 2 pages of real content cover the story, such as it is. All of the text has a typewritten look, fixed width font, and the design carries over the paint splotch look behind photos and behind the page numbers. There are a couple hints scattered throughout. One deals with how to customize your bike given the surface conditions, which I already discussed a little while back, and the other hint says, get out in front early so you don't get tripped up in other riders' falls. I made a quick list of errors and omissions in the manual. Under tournament it says, each race has a qualifying round before the final event. But that's not true. There's a series of heats followed by a semifinal and then the final event. There's no description of how the tournament actually works. Under selecting your rider, it reads, press left on the joypad to move to the next space, which is wrong. You press right on the joypad to move to the next space. The manual also fails to describe what the A, B, and C buttons do when entering a name. That would have been nice to know. Switching over to the official Jaguar Gamer's Guide, you will not find any reference to Supercross 3D, so stop looking for it. Print ads for the game were also rather lacking. I found one sports-themed ad in Electronic Gaming Monthly, January 1996. It's a mock newspaper bearing the headline, Unbelievable, Thumb Breaks 4 World Records. You have a picture of a giant thumb riding in the back of a convertible through a litter-filled parade. There's a smaller photo of the giant thumb, whose name apparently is Thumb, and the smaller photo has a caption, a quote from Thumb, who says, I'm no hero, I'm the same extremity I was 2 days ago. The gist of the ad is that Thumb dominated in 4 Jaguar sports games, which includes NBA Jam Tournament Edition, Super Burnout, Val d'Isère Skiing and Snowboarding, and Supercross 3D. The Supercross bit has a picture of the box and a separate picture that matches the screenshot on the front of the box, and it carries the caption, Overcoming serious cramp, Thumb catches air as he sweeps all 14 Supercross titles. I have half a mind to read the whole thing. It's mildly entertaining and really rather weird, but instead what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this in the show notes so that you can experience it in its entirety for yourself. Reviews of Supercross 3D were generally negative. Make that universally negative. Make that universally scathing. Let's start with GamePro. It's a little mini review, just one screenshot and one paragraph, but it does include the 4-point breakdown, which is on a scale of 1 to 5. Graphics are 2.0, sound 1.5, control 2.5, and fun factor 2.0. The reviewer says that the action is slow, and the tricky controls add to the frustration. A strobe light flicker mars the generic tracks, and schlocky sounds only add to the agony. Bishop. Skylar clip number 6, please.
Ouch.
Video Games Magazine, April 1996. On a scale of 1 to 10, graphics are rated a 7, sound effects a 6, gameplay a 5, and overall rating is 5 out of 10. The reviewer says that customizable riders are a plus, and likes how big they are on screen, but says the irritating gameplay and unimaginative track designs are a big negative. Also, quote, a practice mode will help you get used to not being able to see where the track ends and death begins, but it won't help you to actually enjoy playing. Bishop. Skylar clip number 6 again.
Ouch.
Alright, let's skip across the pond and look at Next Generation, also April 1996. Supercross 3D is given a rating of 1 star out of 5. The reviewer says that the game manages to eliminate most of the raw potential of this fabulous sport, which is an impressive feat in and of itself. The delivery is extremely choppy, and the look is thoroughly mediocre. It's not all bad news here. It says the tracks are well designed and bike customization is nicely presented. But in the end, the review says, it's difficult to find a star small enough to rate this game. Bishop, you know what to do.
Ouch.
That's right. ST Magazine out of France, March 1996. In a review, which was helpfully translated for me by Arethius, reviewer Mark Abramson says that the game is actually quite a disgrace. He complains about the number of colors on screen, everything is jagged and ugly, and the track has a poopy brown color. He says the sound effects are atrocious, especially the engine noise. He compares the game to Club Drive, saying that Supercross 3D is 10 times worse. An abomination. Do not buy this game, he says. Throw it in the face of the one who accidentally gave it to you. Ugh, that hurt. For pros, he lists none, and for cons, predictably, everything. Advice, avoid at all cost. Graphics 25%, sound 18%, animation 18%, playability 5%, replay value 4%, and average 14%. Bishop, just set it to auto ouch, please.
Ouch.
Yeah. Atari Explorer Online did not give the game a full review, but did award it a score of 5 out of 10 in their January 1996 issue. Game Zero magazine, an online magazine, reviewed the game in February of 1996. One of the reviewers proposes an equation where Supercross 3D equals Excitebike plus horrible 3D environment minus frame rate minus every last drop of fun. The other reviewer said that the game was so terrible it nearly brought tears to his eyes, and that you should avoid it like the plague. Each one of these reviewers rated the game on what's probably a 10-point scale, and I'm going to average them together here in my head. Graphics 1.0, sound 1.25, gameplay and control 0.5 each, longevity and playability 0, overall 0.5. Total score, it looks like, is 7.5 out of 50, or 15%.
Ouch.
Another review, which certainly looks contemporary with the others, was hosted by electricescape.net. The reviewer says that Supercross 3D could almost be seen as a first-person sequel to the early Nintendo game Excitebike, and that it's an engrossing and fast-paced game, which is exciting and fun, and simply delightful. He says the gameplay is captivating, but the frame rate is a slow 12 to 15 frames per second, which is playable, but distracting and disappointing. He's not a big fan of the music, and laments the lack of a two-player mode. Overall scores on a scale of 1 to 10, gameplay 8.5, graphics 7, sound 6.5, and overall 8. Okay, I was wrong. They're not universally scathing.
Ouch.
Yeah, not this time. For that, we could look to the Atari Times, February 2002, which starts off with the headline, "Pathetic trash like this deserves to be bashed." Overall scores, graphics 50%, sound and music 50%, gameplay 5%, and control, well, control is a null value, not even 0, I guess. Final score, 15%.
Ouch.
One of the comments to this review, and my daughter wanted to make sure I included that in this episode, one of the comments says that this game should be called Supercross 3 FPS, for 3 frames per second.
Ouch.
I've got a couple more modern-ish reviews which are relatively positive. Atari Gaming Headquarters says that the game is fun to play with a fast-driving soundtrack and nice little touches like the giant screen and advertising around the track. Overall score 6 out of 10. And the French fanzine Jaguar, that's Jag-WAR. I don't have a date on this one, but I do have a translation of the summary, thanks again to Arethius. The summary reads, "I must confess, besides its flaws, and if you are, like me, into Supercross, then you might have fun with this Supercross 3D. True, it has its share of letdowns, but there is realism in the game, like the falls are realistic, and also configuration of your bike. Steering is difficult, just like on a real 500 Supercross motorbike. However, I would recommend this game only to fans of the genre. Graphics 70%, animation 40%, sound effects 75%, controls 80%, replay value 80%, and overall 75%. There's a tip here which says to take hard tires on soft tracks and a high gear on the rough terrain. The tires thing is kind of the exact opposite of what the manual says. I'm not sure whom to believe there. Finishing up the reviews, Just Claw's Jag site, 2 stars out of 5. and the video game critic gives the game a grade of F. Just how bad can a Jaguar cartridge be, he asks, before answering pretty bad. He says the animation and frame rate are remarkably rough, the controls are oversensitive, and collision detection is non-existent.
Ouch.
The average review score on mobygames.com is 26%, with 9 reviews ranging from 50% at the top to 0% at the bottom. If you wanted to snag your own copy of Supercross 3D, Video 61 has it listed new for $60. On eBay, I've seen recent sales for $22 loose, $28 to $36 complete. Current listings as of the middle of May 2019, when I wrote these numbers down, there's a complete inbox for $5.50, but with close to $20 shipping. Always consider the shipping price. I see complete buy it now for $71 from Germany. That includes free shipping. And also complete listings for $80, $90, and $95. On Amazon.com, I see a copy for about $60. Says it's new, which, for Amazon, that's not bad. There are a few reviews here of the game. One of them is actually pretty comprehensive. A user by the name of Pathos. I believe here we go. He says that one of the songs sounds like Nirvana's Come As You Are. I didn't get that vibe while playing the game, but I do hear it now. I had a different take on one of the gameplay songs. One part sounded a lot to me like Led Zeppelin's Immigrant Song. I'll go ahead and include a link to this review in the show notes. So, is Supercross 3D worth the money? Only you can say for sure, but I will give my opinion and rating along with those of fellow listeners right after this. I can't say for sure why I didn't have any interest in Supercross 3D around late 1995, early 96. Maybe I didn't see it in stores, maybe I didn't have enough money and prioritized other Jaguar titles instead. I kind of like racing games, and a motocross game isn't without appeal. Plus, I drank an inordinate amount of Mountain Dew back then, more than enough, I'd say, to get vertical if I wanted to. But I didn't want to. For whatever reason, Supercross 3D didn't enter my collection until last year, knowing that this episode was coming up. Loose cartridge off eBay, which is good enough for me. I plugged it in to make sure it worked, found the title screen pretty choppy, which didn't bode well, but I put the game aside until after the flashback episode, so I'd be approaching it pretty fresh. Well, the cartridge wasn't fresh. It was pretty dirty on the outside, like the cart itself had been involved in a motocross event, but it cleaned up nicely. I was looking forward to this one. I did an interview with Arcade Attack recently, link in the show notes, and in this interview, I said that I most looked forward to Jaguar games that I hadn't really played yet, especially exclusives. So, after Flashback, I was definitely eager to dig into Supercross 3D. I didn't really like this one. Most of the troubles, unsurprisingly, come down to the frame rate. If you're racing by yourself, it's not bad. It's not good, but it's playable. Low end of playable, I'd say, but you could work with it. The controls are pretty good, I found. I liked how I could approach a 90-degree turn, lay off the throttle, and lean hard on the D-pad, then jam on the throttle at the apex to pull off that turn without oversteer or understeer. I think they got it dialed in just right, at least under ideal circumstances. Unfortunately, circumstances aren't often ideal in this game. The sounds are... I don't know. I tend to not expect much from racing games. Buzzy little engines, no crowd noise. You do say ow when you crash, but that's about it. The music is okay, don't love it, don't hate it. I like how there's music everywhere, though never a dull moment. But the game's flaws come out in force when you're racing other bikes, and especially when they're sharing the screen with you. Given that there isn't much to this game outside of racing other bikes, that kinda kills it for me. Taking a turn with 3 or 4 bikes nearby, you lose your bearings. You might appear to be careening off the track one frame, and then perfectly copacetic the next, and vice versa. The decent controls, they go out the window, and I felt genuine motion sickness trying to play this. I'm not usually one to get motion sick playing games, but here, it was actually kind of nauseating. Before I give you my rating on Supercross 3D, let's break down the pros and the cons. The pros, the tracks are fine. I don't know what real motocross tracks are supposed to look like, but I think they're fine here. Each city is a different track, some are longer than others. Also, the tracks are clearly marked, and I'm never at a loss for knowing where I need to go. I think the Jumbotron thing is a nice touch, makes the track feel more alive, and I like how it stores lap times when you break the record, even though it only shows your team name and not your actual name, or whatever you entered for your rider. The game is tolerable and borderline fun if you're in the lead, if you've got nobody else crowding you and driving down your frame rate and making your controls do unexpected things and making you feel...
You said you're doing pros.
Right. So where was I? Yeah, borderline tolerable and fun when you're winning. I really like that there are so many other riders on the track with you, but not so much when they're right next to you. I think the overall concept is fine. I don't care much about the sport itself, but I think it translates well to video game form. I liked not having to repair my bike or anything like that between races. There's no earning cash or buying things, which honestly is a mechanic I don't really care for in racing games. The sprites are nice and big. I think they're rendered okay. They're very colorful. The definite spinning wheels kick up dirt as you drive, and the riders will kick out a leg for a tight turn. The character sprites also have well-defined buttocks, if you're into that sort of thing. Going through the cons now, and yes, it occurs to me that I ended the pros on buttocks. The ending is super weak. Winning the tournament is not really worth it. Performing tricks is totally useless. Maybe a speed boost or something would have been a decent reward for pulling that off. Extra style points maybe. Just make it more strategic. Give it a risk-reward kind of balance. The game is really unforgiving if you deviate from the course. It doesn't slow you down. Most of the time it makes you crash. And that makes no sense. The flat brown dirt will knock you right over, but the textured brown dirt does not. It's arbitrary video game logic at its best, or worst. The ability to customize your bike is neat, but I don't know how much of a difference it actually makes. I didn't really notice either way. Other problems eclipse those variables. And speaking of which, there's the frame rate, ranging from poor to inconsistent to terrible. It really affects your race. It's not just cosmetic, it will cost you victories, and maybe even make you feel like you're going to hurl. Clay Hallowell, on behalf of Jaguar Explorer Online, interviewed Martin Brownlow, the programmer behind Missile Command 3D, and this is what Mr. Brownlow had to say about texture mapping on the Jaguar, using Supercross 3D as an example. This is what he said. Blame Atari. Oh, texture this, texture that, texture the other, but textures are at least 8 times slower than flat shaded, says I. Actually, says Atari, they're at least 22 times slower, but we want them anyway. You saw how the motorcycle game came out, really slow. That's because they gave in to Atari and textured everything, which the Jag just can't handle. The No Swear Gamer scale is what we use for rating games on this podcast. It uses 4 categories. Hall of Fame is at the top, then Solid, followed by Meh, and finally Trash. The fancy part here in the scale is that Hall of Fame and Trash are symmetrical and can only hold 5 games each, either the top 5 Jaguar games or the bottom 5. For me, Supercross 3D falls into that bottom 5 group, the trash rating. Maybe Martin Brownlow was right and the textures really killed the game. It makes me wonder how it would have run with shaded polygons instead, but regardless, it's a racing game where you end up competing much more with the frame rate than you do with the other riders on the track, and that's not much fun. So yeah, I'd place it in the bottom 5 Jaguar games, but that's just my opinion. What do you think? I posed the question to Facebook and heard from Rhett, who said, the single-digit frame rate, farty sound effects, and agonizing collision detection certainly prevent this game from being good, but the attempt is admirable. For early 3D, the level layout feels like a step ahead of the usual super-scalar-esque racers you see on the Jag, like Super Burnout and Val d'Isere. Of course, those games both play like a dream in comparison, but it is nice in this game to see the other racers riding around different turns on the twisty, compressed 3D tracks, and the attempt at having the large spectator screen also show the race in real time is a nice visual flourish, even if those are 2 of the big reasons the frame rate is so bad. The other thing I really dislike about this game is that there doesn't seem to be any real physics. You don't bounce around the map or the characters, you just get stuck on corners and buggy parts of the map and just stop. All told, though, like a lot of Jag games, there's charm in an inexperienced developer team trying their best to make a real game, and that ambition and naivete leads to gaming experiences that are just a little bit different than anything else you'll find on rival consoles. Supercross 3D is simple enough to pick up and play, and I do bust it out from time to time, but the gameplay problems mean those playthroughs usually end relatively quick in frustration. Certainly not the worst game on the system, though, so all roads lead to meh. Yeah, Rhett, that's totally true about the other riders, the other 6 or 7 sharing the track with you. It is nice to see them. It makes the track feel more alive and dynamic, having all those other riders doing the same thing you're doing. Maybe better, maybe not as well. And, yeah, the charm factor, there is that. It's one of the things I like about Jaguar games, to be honest. There is a measure of charm, even if the games aren't great. Thank you, Rhett, for your feedback. It's well thought out and good to have. Next up on Facebook is RD. He says, trash. Still have nightmares about this one. I think I paid $5 for it when Incredible Universe was going out of business, and I still feel like I got ripped off. It was really heartbreaking because about this time so many great racers were hitting the arcades, Daytona, and home consoles, Ridge Racer on the PlayStation, and Jaguar owners got this. Thankfully, we had gotten a good motorcycle game earlier that year, but we'll discuss Super Burnout another day. Thanks, RD. I definitely paid more than $5 for my copy. I think it was around $30. I'm not going to check right now, though. I agree with your rating, but I can't say that I feel ripped off. Maybe it's because I wasn't expecting much. This is easily one of the lowest rated Jaguar games, and I knew that going in. So it kind of met my low expectations. Super Burnout is coming up pretty soon, just a couple episodes out. Thank you, RD, for your feedback. We heard from Björn, who said, it's trash, mainly because of the low frame rate. Thank you, Björn. Yeah, the frame rate and control issues that result from the frame rate, that really kills it. We got some feedback from Roberth, who said, well, before I read his feedback, I wanted to say that the picture I posted to Facebook is a promotional flyer for Supercross 3D. I think it might have been given to dealers, but I found it on Moby Games, and it was uploaded there by Roberth, so thank you for that, and credit where it's due. Arethius sent me those as well, so thanks guys for making that stuff available. Anyway, Roberth wrote, I would say trash, but I'm conflicted between it and Checkered Flag. The graphics are not that bad. I like the mix of ground shading and texture polygons, even the convincing jumbo screen effect. But the latter is what potentially causes one of the game's biggest crippling problems. The frame rate is somehow even worse than Checkered Flag, leading to a more unresponsive control, and I didn't even know that was humanly possible. While in Checkered Flag, it's probably due to bad optimization. The music is not bad, just like Checkered Flag, and I still find myself humming the tunes sometimes. So I would rate the game trash, but again, I'm still conflicted between the two. If anybody wants a good racing game on the Jaguar, pick either Super Burnout or Power Drive Rally. Heck, even Club Drive is more fun than Supercross 3D. Thanks, Roberth. It looks to me like the game uses either flat shading or textures. I didn't notice any shading within a polygon. Well, the flat shading does seem to have different colors depending on the location of an invisible light source, but I didn't notice anything fancier than that. It is a lot like Checkered Flag in that the frame rate does severely impact controls and playability, and that the music is decent. I wouldn't say which one is better or worse than the other. For the purpose of the rating scale, it doesn't really matter. They're both in the same category. And you're right, the graphics aren't bad in magazines and on the box. They're not bad, they just don't move well. The writers have lots of frames of animation, but it's just so choppy that it becomes unplayable at times. Thanks again, Roberth, for your feedback. And that brings us to Liam, who says, I haven't played it, but even despite the negatives I hear about it, I'd still like to try it. Yeah, man, that's the spirit. Great mindset, Liam. I felt the same way, and while yeah, I do think it's a pretty bad game, that's just my opinion, as I said. So by all means, try it out yourself and form your own opinion. I'm certainly no authority on this. Over on the forums, Atari.io, we've got a post from Atarilbc, so let me pull that up. Supercross 3D. I'm sure this will get a lot of trash ratings. It's generally mentioned as one of the worst games in the Jaguar's library. I remember first reading about Supercross 3D in a preview in '95, and it looked promising. Once released, the actual reviews were less favorable. I ended up buying it at Electronics Boutique when stores started liquidating Jaguar stock in the summer of '96. On the positive side, control is simple and precise, and the track layouts are well designed and varied. Graphically, the riders, onlookers, and tracks look pretty good when you're not moving. The Jumbotron following the action is a great touch. I'm also impressed by the dirt being kicked up by the tires. There's even a brief replay of both accidents and finishes. It's all very next-gen for 1995, and it's clear that a lot of thought went into these aspects of the game. Unfortunately, the graphical touches, particularly the use of texture mapping, are likely the cause of the game-breaking slowdown. In race mode, the frame rate is incredibly slow, and the graphics are so choppy that the game is practically unplayable. This is most noticeable at points in the race where several riders are on the screen at once. The choppiness is distracting to the point that it can cause a wreck and the loss of several places. It's truly frustrating, especially in tournament, where the goal is to finish in the top 3. Then there is the unforgiving collision detection, where any contact with the flat shaded areas just off the track cause your bike to wreck. It really becomes an issue in tight cornering. And what fun is racing if you can't hug corners? In practice mode, Supercross 3D is almost enjoyable. With only one bike on the screen, the frame rate issues are a lot less distracting. You actually get a sense of speed. It's no surprise that practice mode is what's displayed in the attract screen. Had Atari and TierTex managed to hold race mode to the same frame rate as in practice, as it is, the game is hard to recommend unless you're a Jaguar enthusiast. I will say that there is something fun about trying to get through tournament mode despite the game's flaws. Supercross 3D challenges you to overcome its frame rate and collision detection issues. That said, fun shouldn't come from fighting through performance and design issues. I really want to like Supercross 3D, but ultimately it was poorly implemented. The frame rate issues and collision detection combined to make Supercross 3D much less fun than it should be. While there is fun to be had in practice mode and in simply overcoming the game-breaking problems, these aren't enough to salvage the game. I won't call it trash, but it's a solid meh. Thanks for reading, and keep up the great work, Shinto. Well, thank you very much, Atarilbc, and I'd have to say that I agree with pretty much everything you said. The unforgiving collision detection just off the track, hard to recommend unless you're a Jaguar enthusiast. Reading your message, though, I wonder how much of an impact the textured surface has on the frame rates compared to rendering and maintaining all those different sprites. I mean, as you said, it's not terribly distracting in practice mode, but in tournament and race mode, the frame rate becomes a real problem. So maybe even if there weren't any textures, we would still have slowdown rendering all the other drivers and their many frames of animation. I don't know. It's impossible to tell at this point. I see where you're coming from with the meh rating, but I've got to have 5 titles in trash, and this is number 3 for me. And looking at the games list, which I'm not right now, but could be... There we go. Looking at the list... Yeah, there's one other one that I'm thinking may be in trash, but the others, I don't know. I haven't played them all, actually. Hey, Bishop. Did we get any text or audio submissions for Supercross 3D?
We did. One text submission. There is also general feedback, including a correction.
A correction?
You got something wrong.
Well, I guess if it's just one thing.
Repeatedly. In 7 episodes.
Oh, well, I guess that's...
Including this one.
Really? Okay, we'll save that one for last. Please send the other feedback to my screen.
Reddit.
Is it just me, or do you sound more gleeful than usual? Huh. Okay, our Supercross 3D feedback is from Arethius. He writes, I must confess I did not play this game in years, since summer 2001, so my memories are not up to date. While I was in Hamburg, Germany for a training period in the banquet department of a 4-star hotel, I was quite lonely besides work, and I had brought my Jaguar and Jag CD with me to keep me company. Supercross 3D is one of the only games I had to break my loneliness, so just for that reason it will always have a special place in my heart, although it is not a good game. My main complaint would be, and I think everyone will agree on that, the frame rate. While the rest of it is okay, the frame rate really hurts the gameplay. Besides this, I like the game. It is not that difficult. I might have played in Rookie or Rad difficulty. I like the fact that you can make some tricks while jumping, but even in 2001, I found that it was too bad that it was always the same move for every biker and at every jump. I remember finding extremely cool the stadium screen broadcasting the race live, although I'm now asking if it is not the little too much touch that is actually taxing the Jaguar and might explain the bad frame rate. It is a nice touch, and without it I would not play Supercross 3D again, but maybe without it the game would have been much smoother. In the end, Supercross 3D is a meh title for me. I will not play it anytime soon, but I will never trash it just for keeping me company during a quite difficult period in my life. That's all I have for now. Keep doing the good work, and until next time. Well, Arethius, personal experience carries a lot of weight, and if Supercross 3D helps you through a tough spot in your life, then yeah, more power to it. The big screens are kind of a double-edged sword, aren't they? You've got to think that they're slowing the game down, and yet they make the game feel more vibrant and alive. I wonder how the game would run if we had the option of turning it off. The moves, the tricks you do while jumping, I found that it seems to alternate between the two, the one-hander and the knack-knack. I didn't see any significant correlation between speed and height in terms of which trick fires when, but it does seem to me like it alternates between those two. Thank you for your story, Arethius, and thanks as always for finding and translating those reviews. It's very helpful. Next, we have a Jaguar story from Hakuzo. He writes, I've been a gamer since I was very young. I started out with a used Atari 2600 that my grandmother bought for us to play. We soon upgraded to a Genesis, so for several years I grew up on the Genesis. As years progressed, I ended up getting most of my game systems several years later. So fast forward several years, like 20 years, when our grandma got the Atari Jaguar. She obtained it from a yard sale with only a few games. Cybermorph, Kasumi Ninja, Dragon the Bruce Lee Story, and maybe a couple others I can't remember. I don't have the system as my cousin got it. Cybermorph was the game I played the most. I was never able to beat any of the games as their difficulty was very high. We were excited when we could press 5 on the keypad and we got Bruce Lee to pull out nunchucks. As this was a used system, we didn't have any of the overlays, so to this day we rarely used the keypad at all. I love the uniqueness of this rare system, and I love to collect retro games. I've only recently just found this podcast, and the retro knowledge is such a great refreshment of memories of better times. I doubt I'll send any more emails because that's the extent of my Jaguar experience. Well, Hakuzo, thank you so much for your story. It's pretty unique among those I've received so far. Most of the stories I've read involve buying a Jaguar at retail or on clearance or even eBay. So a yard sale find, that's pretty neat. It's too bad about the overlays. Well, I guess Cybermorph would have been the only one of those games that came with an overlay. Most of the functions aren't terribly useful, changing camera angles, but the top row kicks off your super weapon. That's pretty handy. I'd have to think Dragon the Bruce Lee Story would be really hard to figure out without the manual. You've got that chi system to figure out and how to use it, and there's also the thing about hitting the option button to change up one of the buttons. It's like, changes it from a kick to a punch or vice versa. I don't really remember. But that's a hard enough game even if you know those two critical bits of information. And then there's Kasumi Ninja, which is probably the most straightforward of them, except it might not be obvious that the C button is used for special moves, holding C and performing some movement on the D-pad, because I don't know of any other fighting games that use that particular mechanic to pull off special moves. The uniqueness of the system is certainly appealing, I agree with you there, and I'm glad you enjoy the show. I really am. So thanks again, Hakuzo, for sending that in. Okay, Bishop, is it time?
It is time.
Alright, let's see what I screwed up. This message is from JagMod. He says, love the podcast, just cringe every time you say Garoud. Garoud, Guro, or Goro. The guy who developed this shading technique, he's French, isn't he? Bishop, what was his name? Henri. So, yeah, French. That would totally be pronounced Goro. Henri Goro. You know, when the Jaguar was announced, I was still studying French, but I never made the connection there. So when you read something but don't actually hear it, it can be hard to tell if you're pronouncing it right. So all along I've been pronouncing it phonetically, anglicized.
You're just making excuses.
I am. Oh, I've got another one. Dr. Seuss, a beloved children's author. Everyone pronounces his last name Seuss, but it's supposed to be Seuss. That's the correct pronunciation. People probably look at you funny if you say, oh, I love that Dr. Seuss book. But you're right, JagMod. I'm sure you're totally right, and I'm wrong. I've got like 26 years of mispronunciation inertia to correct, and I can't guarantee I won't slip up in the future, but I'll certainly try to get it right going forward. Ladies and gentlemen, that is all I have for Supercross 3D on the Atari Jaguar. I do thank you for joining me, and I hope you'll tune in next time when we discuss the game Theme Park. After that, we'll be talking about another motorcycle racing game, the one that came up more than once in this episode, and that's Super Burnout. And then Syndicate and Rayman round out the next 4 episodes. If you've got any feedback you'd like to send in for these upcoming games, any game that I've already covered, or the show in general, anything I've mispronounced, except for Ted Takuichi. I know that I got his name wrong throughout the Kasume Ninja episode, and I feel terrible about that because he was so helpful with that episode. But yeah, any feedback, please send that in, text or audio file to the email address jaguar@gamebygamepodcast.com. All show links can be found on the web at jaguar.gamebygamepodcast.com. Or if you prefer, on Gopher, gamebygamepodcast.com/1/Jaguar if you wanted to kick it old school. I've got some story time after the music, like why I just listed off a Gopher address, so you can stick around for that or not, but whichever track you choose, please remember that there is a lot of good to be found out there in this world of ours, even with widely ridiculed video game consoles. So do try to keep an open mind and a joyful heart. Thank you for listening.
And now, story time with Shinto.
Speaking of Mountain Dew, I really got into that particular carbonated beverage in college. My friend Greg always had a supply of this stuff with him. I remember one time in our first semester chemistry class, we sat toward the back of the giant auditorium where the lectures were held, and well, cracking open a can of something wasn't frowned upon, but what Greg did was he handed out a can of Mountain Dew to each of us, our group of 5 slackers, and we opened up each one in sequence. We got dirty looks, but no serious repercussions. That came later with the midterm exam results, but I think I became rather addicted to the yellow, fizzy, caffeinated stuff. I drank a lot of it, and for a few months, I guess this was 1995, for a few months, every can that I drank at home, I saved. I rinsed out the can and set it on top of my computer desk. Before long, it stretched all the way to the ceiling, across the top of the desk, and wrapping around the front. I've got pictures of this, maybe I'll put one in the show notes. This lasted until I had my window open on a windy day and, empty aluminum cans lightly stacked. Let's just say it didn't hold up. There's another little Mountain Dew story I could tell. We often went to Arby's for lunch, a fast food chain, Arby's. Cheap food, cheap. You could order what was called an Arby's melt. It was a roast beef sandwich with melted yellow cheese of some sort, and you could get these for $1. We would generally order 2 of these each, plus a small fountain drink, Mountain Dew of course, and pay $3 per person, which is pretty good for a starving college kid. We'd go up to the counter and order 2 Arby's melts, and 2 more, and 2 more, and 2 more. The small drink was fine because it was free refills, so we'd all grab a refill on our way out. One day I was at Arby's with 2 of my friends, Chewy and Greg. You may remember Greg from the Zool 2 Storytime segment, or a minute ago from chemistry class. And Greg and Chewy decided it'd be fun if they ran to the car ahead of me, locked the doors, and started to leave. There wasn't much I could do standing there watching them back out of the parking space. All I had was my freshly refilled cup of Mountain Dew, so I pulled off the lid and dumped it all over Greg's windshield. It shocked him enough, I think, to stop the car and let me in. I'm still not sure how that worked, but it worked. I haven't had a Mountain Dew in several years, or any super sugary carbonated beverage for that matter. Stuff's terrible for you. I've run the Linux operating system on my various home computers since 1995. Slackware 3.0 was my first distro. I got started on Linux because at the university I attended, they had a lab full of Sun machines, Sun microsystems. And I'd log into one of these and be presented with this exotic interface, which I learned was called X-Window. And it would either run TWM or CDE on these huge high-resolution monitors. They had to be like 17 inches, which doesn't sound like much now, but dwarfed the 14-incher I had at home. So when you're accustomed to running Microsoft Windows, it would have been Windows 3.1 at the time, TWM is so weird, and I was captivated by this totally different design. I wanted to run something like that at home, too. Then I discovered Linux. I had a 230 megabyte hard drive that I'd gotten from work, plenty of space for Linux, so I added it to my computer, which already had a hard drive for DOS and Windows. And 2 floppy drives and a CD-ROM. There was no physical room for a second hard drive, but I made it fit somehow. I got Linux installed, spent hours getting X-Window to actually start up, and it was great. For a while. The next time I needed to monkey around the guts of that desktop computer, I couldn't get that loose second hard drive to fit in just right the way I had it before. There may have been some mild cramming involved, and I accidentally popped a chip right off the drive's board in the process. That hard drive never booted again, even after I soldered the chip back on, and my friend Cert would laugh and laugh when I told him about it. In 2004, with the release of Ubuntu 5.04, the Hoary Hedgehog it was called, Linux became my default operating system. I only booted into Windows for games and video capture. I did a lot of video stuff back then, and my capture board only worked on Windows. Even then, just barely. I followed the new Ubuntu releases, upgrading along the way. New PCs or laptops would always get the latest Ubuntu version. But all that changed after 16.04, the Xenial, when the default init system changed from Upstart to Systemd. I had all kinds of stupid problems, like Systemd preventing the computer from shutting down, of all things. It couldn't shut down. Didn't happen all the time, but enough to become a serious annoyance. I went from a system that worked nicely to one that had bizarre, intermittent problems. It was possible to go back to using Upstart, until it wasn't. The final straw with Systemd was its DNS resolver. It doesn't support strict ordering of name servers. I've relied on that for decades, and now it doesn't work. They don't want to fix it, and ripping it out to install DNSMask was getting to be a pain. So then I discovered a Linux distribution called Devuin. It's a fork of Debian, which I've used and loved since the late 90s. That was my go-to server OS for a while. But now, Systemd is the only game in town if you want to run Debian. So I've been switching all my machines over to Devuin, servers and desktop and laptops and stuff. I get Systemd, I don't have anything against it personally, I use it at work, but at home, with my use cases, I didn't want to use it, and I shouldn't have to use it. I should have the freedom to use whichever init system I choose. So that's why I switched to Devuin. That does mean that I can't run the GNOME desktop environment anymore, but while I would sing the praises of GNOME 2, GNOME 3 was such a drastic change to my workflow that I couldn't get used to it. KDE is my go-to environment now, except for older systems which run XFCE. Where am I going with all this? Last month, April 2019, a message appeared on the Devuin homepage saying that they'd been hacked, and the hackers defaced the page, leaving a message saying that people should stop using the World Wide Web altogether and go back to using Gopher. Port 70 for the win, or something like that. Gopher predated the World Wide Web. It was a structured menu system which I'd used in college. I would look up Atari information on Gopher. I might have even found Atari Explorer online through Gopher. It's purely text-based, there are no inline images, but you can download binary files, pictures and stuff if you needed to. This was all an April Fool's Day prank from Devuin. In poor taste, many would say, because you don't want your operating system of choice to joke about being hacked. That throws the entire package management system into dispute. Very dangerous, don't do that. But I got to thinking about Gopher. I started looking into the protocol, and I decided that I could pretty easily make the whole GameByGamePodcast.com site work on Gopher in addition to the web. GameByGamePodcast.com, I wanted it to be small and fast. It's got minimal graphics, no on-demand database queries, nothing like that. So what I do is I generate static HTML. I wrote a program to totally rebuild the site twice a day using the latest information from each podcast that I have listed there. And if I'm building static HTML like this, why not Gopher? So I set it up. Rebuilding the site, both for web and Gopher, it takes about 1 second, maybe a little less. It's no big deal. It's just code. I don't know if anybody's going to use it. I just considered it a fun little exercise, learning something new. Well, old, but building Gopher holes is new to me. And, it was kind of state-of-the-art technology back when the Jaguar was being developed and launched. So, in a way, it's kind of related. At the bottom of the screen, you have the Track record. Lap. Goro shading. How about that Jaguar and its Goro shading? Boy, I do like that Goro shading look. That Jaguar's got some distinctive Goro shading. Working on it.